Well, welcome. I'm glad you found a way over here and after lunch. I'm going to talk about how I help developers talk about their needs and feelings. My name is Gitte Klitgaard, and I work as I think my official title is Agile Coach. I'm at SVT at the moment, Swedish Public Television, where I am working on the data strategy together with the head of data. I'm not a traditional Agile coach. I do what is needed. A lot of it is about communication, collaboration, psychological safety, but also about getting structure, going from a vision to something that people can actually relate to. And at the moment, I'm working on strategy because I don't know how I ended up there, but I am. I'm native wired everywhere, including where I don't think I am and get super annoyed that someone took my name until I figure out it's me, and I forgot. I wrote a bit in a book about psychological safety for teams, and my pronouns is she and her. So the first thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is like, why is this so hard? We all have feelings, we all have needs, we all have emotions. So why is it so hard to talk about? And part of it is the F word. There's 2 F words when you go to the US because you can't say fuck. The other F word is feelings. We don't talk about our feelings. Many cultures don't talk about feelings. And when I say cultures, I mean country cultures, nationalities, but also many like work cultures or other kinds of cultures that we live in don't really talk about feelings because it's private. And to some people it's super private, to others it's not. We also have the unfortunate still that a lot of boys are discouraged to talk about feelings or needs, and the only kind of accepted emotion is being angry, because you're not supposed to cry. We don't want boys to cry. And we do have a lot of guys in the industry. Not saying that women are always good at talking about their feelings, but it just brings the next aspect. And I think we have a tiny bit of introverts as well. Plus, some of the teams I work with, we have people who are somewhere on the autistic spectrum, which is usually not something we notice, because so being in IT, I can say this, most of us are a little bit strange. So you never know if it's a diagnosis or not. When it comes to talking about needs, it becomes even harder. What do I need? And especially when it comes to what do I need in a team. Also because not everyone knows about their needs. I was almost 40 before I started being able to articulate my needs or even figure out what I needed. Because I have never been used to being asked about it or considered it or going by it. And a lot of people never ever talk about their needs. That we do say needs in words, but it's same like, like a chicken salad is not a salad. Just because you have salad in it, it's not vegetarian. Same like I feel like I would hit you is not a feeling. It's an anger feeling, but when it comes to needs, it's even worse. And what is a need? I need to go to the bathroom. No, actually you don't. You do need to get rid of something, but you don't need to go to the bathroom. That is a want. So how do we go in and look at these things? That's another problem. And then, of course, we don't want emotions at work. That's fuha. Because a lot of people think that being professional is about not having emotions. So like, well, act as a professional. Don't be too sensitive. Don't be too emotional. I have a bunch of links in the slides afterwards, and one of them is from the US Senate, where this woman talks very emotionally about why she's emotional. And why would we go to work every day if we didn't care about what we do? Caring is an emotion. If we don't care about what comes out of it, if it's just a job where we get money and then we go home, well, that's okay if that's what you want. But a lot of us, and especially in the knowledge industry, we do this because we care. And the more we care about stuff, the more our emotions can pop out. And then if we don't know how to do that, they become big and Sometimes emotions explode. And then again, their feelings do not belong at work, because that's not where we're supposed to be. This is a quote from, I think, 2019. I should actually look that up. From Mr. Derby. It seems that be professional is code for suppress emotions and personal needs. We talk about that in so many words, where to me being professional is about, do you do what you say you will do? And if you cannot, do you tell people? If you commit to something and something happens because stuff happens because we work with so many unknowns, do you tell people? Do you show respect for other people? There's a lot of things that's into being professional, but not having emotions is not one of them. Part of what that does is it puts up a facade. This is how we go to work. We have this nice work facade, everything is fine. I have worked as a manager where I've been told I don't smile enough by my managers. I have to smile all the time, and I'm like, so basically you want me to tell to my employees that it's not okay to be sad, and it's not a safe space to be who you are? Which my manager did not answer. But I actually think that doing that, putting on that facade and always being happy, of course we shouldn't go around and saying everything's shit. You still need to take care of people, and especially now where there's a lot of firing going on, you do have to do something to care for your people. But if you always smile, if you always pretend everything is fine, that's toxic positivity. What happens if we do this for too long is we end up here. We don't know what's behind the mask when we take it off. And I can say this happened to me when I started kind of being who I am now, or who I've always been, but have been hiding because I was the good girl, as you're supposed to be, and from Northern Jutland, and you don't complain, you don't speak up too much, and you definitely don't think you're good at anything. And taking that off left me with, I don't really know what's going on. And that's one of the reasons why when we come into conflict that has to do with our needs, which a lot of them actually are, we don't know how to handle this. We don't know how to talk about these things. So I worked with people, humans, for a very long time. Some of the things that I worked with have been collaboration, communication. There's some people who think if we put 5 people together in a room, they're going to be a team, ta-da! And because communication is a human thing, they know how to do that immediately. So I worked a lot with that. I worked a lot with psychological safety, which is about feeling safe enough to be who you are, to disagree, bring all of yourself to work. You don't have to show all of yourself, but you have the option to, without being afraid to be punished in some way, being fired or being ridiculed. One of the reasons that speaking in front of people is a fear for many people is that they're afraid to be ridiculed. Because deep down in our brain, we want to belong to the tribe, because nobody survives on their own if you're on the plains. And our brain still reacts like we are running around on the plains, and out there you can't, well, very few can survive on their own. So we want to belong. So psychological safety is also about finding a way to be together where you are not afraid to be kicked out of the team. I also worked a lot with solving conflicts. Most of them, what I did was I got people to talk to each other. I put them into a room and I gave them some rules about how to talk to each other, and then I asked them to talk to each other. It's amazing what you can do if people talk to each other. And I would have very little to do if they did. But when it comes to this, communication is almost always the problem. I've been in so many conflicts where I've been helping people out, and very often it's about how they communicate or not communicate. Using similar words but meaning something different. Speaking, like right now I'm speaking English, which is my second language-ish, but I work where other people speak Swedish to me. which I mostly understand, and can small talk in. But still, there's a lot of misunderstandings that can happen in cases like this. Especially because in tech, we tend to not be trained in communication. Because that's not what we learned at university or wherever we took our education, whether we did it on our own. What we are very good at is solving problems. That's what we learn. We learn tech. All the other stuff is just, I mean, at my old university, one of the things they're struggling with is that the computer scientists are a little bit too cocky and think that all the soft stuff is not important. Because it's not valuable, they don't produce anything. But actually, that's one of the big things when you work in tech is you have to communicate. And it's super hard to do that. So, I'll tell you a story about a team. By the way, this is me opening an open space in Canada. So I was working with this team. It was a cross-functional team, meaning that the team had developers, UX, tester, product owner. I put them under one hat as developers. They were doing ensemble programming most of the time, or mob programming as some call it, and they were hybrid. 3 of the people were always remote, except for 2 times a year. I have worked with them for a while at this point, and some of them I even knew 5 years earlier when I also worked at Swedish television. They have a tendency to keep their people for long because people like to be there. I always start with a one-on-one talk when I work with teams. Just figuring out who they are, building that rapport, figuring out, what do they need? How do I work with them? Some of them are, like one of the guys in this one is actually autistic and ADHD. And the cool thing about that is he's very aware of what he needs. Like if I do a round and ask people, I will never ask him first. Because he likes to see what he's supposed to, how he's supposed to react. He keeps his camera off all the time, most of the time, because he's masking. So talking to people, figuring out what makes them tick, figuring out what they think they need help with. And when I do this with teams, it means that I know people a lot better than just sitting together with them. We had several workshops where we discussed how to collaborate, how to communicate. So we already had a lot of these things, and they trusted me in this. One of them said to me, kind of like, what surprised you the most? I asked in my first workshop as a checkout, and he was like, that I don't want to kill myself after a day of workshop. So I had a good deal of trust with these people. And I had a feeling something was going on. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but there was something going on, and I was like, I should ask them if they want another workshop, because there was something underneath. I also wrote that down. It turns out I didn't have to, because it exploded. So they were having a hybrid meeting, they were having some group discussions, not as in disagreeing on things, though a little bit. And there were 2 of these people who had a few clashes before this about different things. There was just something in the way they were thinking and the way they liked to work that made them clash. And they both had super good intent, and they were really trying, but there was this thing. And in this meeting, it just went boom. And the hybrid person closed down the meeting, threw his computer into a closet, went for a walk, and called me. Later, he called his manager as well. After an hour, the other party called me as well, which is super nice, because that means that they actually trust me. So I listened to people, and I suggested that we have a workshop, because you can't just solve this by saying, well, what you can do is you can ignore it until it's exposed next time. But that's not very helpful. These people had to work together. They're working on important things. So I was like, can we take a workshop? I think this is the most important thing in your team right now. Because even if it was 2 people who was mainly affected by this in that moment, everyone else was affected as well, and there were tiny conflicts for other people. So one of the things that went wrong is when you communicate, you tend to think that what you say is like the communication. My beautiful drawing is an example of why I'm not a designer. And that's kind of what you think. But the thing is, what do we hear? Right now, I'm speaking English, which is not my first language. I don't know if any of you have English as your first language. So you might not actually hear what I think you will hear because you have a different background. Because that's the next thing is, you have a different background. You have a different culture. You have a perception of what's going to happen. And all of that influences what you hear. So if you have a conversation and a week after you write down what you talked about, those 2 people will usually not have the same perception of it. And of course, the other person also has culture and background and history. And then the last part is the context. You hear things differently depending on who says it. If your manager says something to you, you will hear differently than if the exact same person, if the exact same message comes from one of your friends. Because there's a context. And that context is also important. And one of the contexts with these 2 people were that they had a conflict before, for instance. And they come from very different places. So that's one of the things that happened is that one person, well, actually both of them were kind of anticipating that the other person would do something to hurt them. So that's what's in the back of their mind. And when we have things in the back of the mind, it affects the way we think and the way we talk. So I started preparing this. I booked a 3-hour meeting because when it comes to going into things that are very sensitive, when I work with psychological safety, when I work with courage, when I work with feelings and need, I ease into it because it is so hard for people to talk about. And especially if you're together with more people. It's easier if I have a one-on-one. I had a one-on-one with each person. And none of them liked to share. They were all, some of them even told me that I was the first person they really talked about needs and emotions. Because you don't do this at work. So I talked with everyone. I wrote down what they felt they needed in the team, what was discouraging for them. And I encouraged all of them to share. But I didn't know if they would. Because I never want to tell people that they have to. It has to come from them. Of course, if I say you have to, they probably will, because they trust me. But it's much more effective if it comes from them. The reason for having a longer workshop is, first of all, to kind of ease into it, but also to take time to think. One of the references in the slides is a book called Time to Think. Because we spend so much time doing at work. And sometimes we forget to take the time to think. So I kind of built that in. And I built in many breaks. Also because I decided to make it fully remote, even though some people were on location, because it's just easier if everyone is fully remote. Hybrid meetings are the worst. And then I put in a lot of information about what does it mean to have feelings. What are feelings? How do we talk about them? What are needs? What are some basic communication rules? So that they could get some of the tools that they needed. Because I think that's one of the reasons we sometimes have teams who cannot communicate is they don't have the tools. And very often companies don't give them the tools because it's just human things. And everyone knows how to talk, so they communicate. So my agenda was like an introduction. When I talk about something sensitive, I always have rules of engagement. I also have a check-in. and I most often use the check-in from time to think, which is, what is something positive that happened the last 2 weeks? One reason for that is that everyone speaks in the meeting, and once you've spoken once, it's easier to speak again. Another thing is we started on a positive note. And then I set the goal of today, like what do we want to achieve? And it feels like super simple things, but I figured out over the years it makes such a difference, especially with the rules of engagement. Saying to people things like, you are expected to contribute, makes a difference. Then I put in something about getting to know each other better, because that's one of the things with things like safety and needs and all of these things, is knowing each other more as humans. Then I put in some information about what are needs, what are feelings, what are communication, and I put in thinking time, because it's super important that you take that time. And I could tell people to do it beforehand. My experience with that for workshops, if I tell them to read something before, it usually never happens. And also, if you feel uncomfortable about thinking about your feelings, you might not do that unless you have to. And then, of course, they needed to talk to each other. And as usual in all my workshops, a little what's next step and wrap up. So the first part of the frame is my rules of engagement. One of them is like, you are here because your opinion matters. You are expected to contribute. With some things, like when I have workshops on psychological safety, it will also be like, what happens in this room stays in this room. Because people will share stuff that they don't want other people to hear. So I put up these rules of engagement, and they will be a little bit different from time to time, but these are very often part of it. I also had this, that it's going to be uncomfortable. And I talked to them about safety before, and I mentioned it again. Being safe is not about always being comfortable. It's about feeling safe enough to be uncomfortable. And I also planted the seed of everyone wants this to work. Because as soon as I say that, it's in their brain. And then I did the check-in of what's something positive that happened. And they're used to this by now, so they just do it. I trained them well. The next part is more specific for the workshop, which are the goals. Part of it was to get to know each other better, because some of the misunderstandings happen because they don't know each other enough. Also, getting to know about needs. What I didn't write, but I also hope would happen, is they got to know more about their own needs. It was also about getting everyone to speak up and feeling like it is safe enough to speak up. Getting them to collaborate better, because the problems, the miscommunications, kept making their collaborations clash. Sometimes small, sometimes big. Nothing as big as this incident before, but it could happen again. And then I told them that it would be a bonus if they started talking more about people stuff. They did have a check-in every morning. How are you doing? But it was never personal. It was, it could be like, yeah, I had a great weekend. But it was never like, I feel happy today, or, there was never anything like really private in that. So the first thing was getting to know each other better. I do this very often when I work with teams. I put them in pairs or sometimes triads if I don't have an even number, sorry. And I try to make safe questions. And they can decide if they want to use these questions or not, but I will have things like, what was your favorite toy? Or if you could do one thing from your childhood again, what would it be? What is your favorite midnight snack? Do you have a guilty pleasure? Something like that. I never go into something really, really personal because that's not a good way to start. I also ask them to think about appreciations, appreciating each other, but also thinking about are there other people that they want to appreciate. And again, it's a little bit about, planting the thought of that in their heads, that it's good to actually tell people when they do something good. And this took about an hour, all of it, getting introduction. And then we had a break. Because especially when you sit and you talk deeply about these things and you do it online, you need breaks. I sometimes give people a task to make sure they get away from the computer. I will ask them to find something red. Never do find something blue or something black, because that's at most desks. But red is usually something people don't have at their desk, and then they come show it. Or it's a way to get them away from the computer, because even though I say you should get away from your computer, sometimes you don't, because you just want to check your emails, or you just want to, make sure that you're doing fine. And then I explained about needs and feelings. I talked about what needs are. I talked about why they're important. I talked about that when we work and spend so much time at work, and when we spend them with a team, we have needs that need to be satisfied. As humans, we have this where we want to belong, and even though we're not aware of this, it's still very strong in us. But we have different needs. Some people have the need to feel accomplished. Some people have the need to have other people tell them how good they are, for instance. So we have different needs. And it's important that you start looking into this. And then the same thing with the feelings. What are feelings? When do we talk about them? And there are official lists about feelings. I think there's like 50 feelings or something like that. But it's more like getting them into the way of thinking. And then some communication basics. What is communication? What is important when you do communicate? To help them get into this mindset of how do we communicate. And then the thinking time. Think about what you need in the team. Think about what you need and you're not getting in the team. What makes you happy in the team? What's a time where you felt anger in the team? And I make these questions quite explicit because it can be super hard to think about these things. And if it's the first time you really sit down and think about needs, it's easy to get stuck in what is a need. If it's someone who's working with needs for a long time, I would not be as explicit. But when you haven't worked with it, it's good to have just a few pointers. In the old days, I would meet agile coaches that would be like, what do you want when people ask them for help? That's fine if you're very good at it. And of course, we want people to take responsibility. But if you've never heard about agile, if you've never heard about retrospective, if you've never heard about any of these things, it's not like you just come up with it. Oh, I think we'll have a meeting once a week where we're going to talk about what happened. That doesn't just pop up in people's head if you've never heard about these things. So sometimes it can be good to guide them without micromanaging, of course. So this is one of the things I talk about when I talk about communication. Being good at communication is about having good skills. But the other part of it is the attitude that you have. Most people nowadays heard about the placebo effect, that you can get some medication or something that you think is medication, and it's not, and you still, they want to figure out if this medication works or not. And what happened in a lot of cases to begin with was that they figured out that people did react to it even though they just got, pills with calcium or whatever. They even have to do double-blind test, because if the doctor knows what is placebo or not, it will affect the test. They've done examples with school teachers having the same class, one being told that this is the most troublesome class they ever had, and the other one being told that this is the smartest class they ever had. And it comes true. So whether you trust them or not, you're right. So I talk to people about this, about what is your attitude when you start talking to people? What are you expecting? And the attitude is towards yourself as well. Sometimes when people end in a conflict, they'll be like, I was so stupid I did this. If you come in with that, it's really hard to be constructive. So how do you go into a conflict? How do you talk about these things? What is your feeling towards the other person? Is there someone specific where you have a different attitude towards? So this is one of the things I use when I talk about communication. I talk about assumptions, and I always quote on the Siege 2, which says, assumptions is the mother of all fuck-ups. So if I have a friend where I asked him, are you busy at work at the moment? And what he heard is, I feel neglected. Because sometimes when people say something, we assume that there's something under that. And a simple question like this, are you busy at work, could mean anything from, you seem stressed. I feel neglected, I haven't heard from you. Are you doing something interesting? And we tend to sometimes assume when we hear something. And again, sometimes it can be because we heard something before, and we know this is how people react. So that can be a part of it. So I talk very much about this because we tend to assume a lot of things. And sometimes it's good that we assume things. If we talk about tech, we should write down what we assume so that we can check up on it. But it's good to do this because it gives so many misunderstandings. And then we came to the talking. So this was after almost 2 hours. With good breaks in between, and this was where I was really worried. Are they actually going to share something? Or will they be holding back? Because it was actually every single person in this team who felt that you don't talk about emotions or needs or whatever with your colleagues. I asked them to talk in turns and say, so what came out of your reflection? Having one person at the time talk, and then my plan was to drive it further, but I didn't. I didn't say a single thing for an hour. So first they started with what they had been thinking about, because that was what was obvious. One person was like, the most important thing for me is to belong to a team, a good team. And someone else was like, the most important thing for me is to work with a good product. And then the team is secondary. So they started talking about these things, and first everyone talked a little bit, and then they just continued. I didn't facilitate it at all, I was just there. They started going deeper and deeper, and they started learning about themselves. So the person who said, the most important thing for me is the product, realized that one of the problems they had with this team is that they felt a little bit like an outsider because they had some other opinions than the rest of the team. And that was why they were struggling. And they didn't know it themselves. It wasn't until they started talking about this that the person found out that it was actually super important to be part of the team. So they learned a lot about themselves. And everyone was exhausted after these 3 hours. One of the things that they discussed a lot was actually AI. And the funny thing is, what is AI? So some people were violently against AI. So this was in April last year. So before it really took off, which it did, November or something like that. Some were really against it. We should not use it in our products. And some thought it was the most amazing thing in the world. It turned out that they were talking about two different things, two different kinds of AI. The UXer loved that you could make prototypes super fast. Use AI for that. And some of the developers as well were like, we can do things super fast. The problem was that they did this in the evening, and then when people came to work the next day, they couldn't recognize the code. Some people were worried about getting code into production, and the ones who really loved AI were not talking about just putting AI code into production. And they thought they were talking about the same thing until they started discussing it more. And some of you, hopefully all of you, know Monty Python. We have an amazing sketch about spam, and we have email spam. I once had this exercise with people to make a folder of a spam theme park. And they were discussing, and I just stood next to them because they didn't realize that they were talking about two different kinds of spam. We have so many things that sound almost the same. 51st State and 51st Dates are two very different movies. One is about drugs, and the other one is about a woman who loses her memory and goes on a new date with her husband every day. And you sit and you discuss this film, and somebody goes like, this is super emotional, and the other one goes like, no, it's not. Until you figure out you're not talking about the same things. And we do this more than we think. Also, being a Danish person in Sweden, it can be super interesting sometimes. Like, for you Danish people, collaborating with someone is called jeg boller med ham. And I still giggle a little bit. And for those of you not Danish, it means I'm going to have sex with. In a childish way of saying it. So sometimes I still giggle in a meeting when people go like, you want to go have sex about this? And I'm like, okay, sure. So even countries that are so close to each other have words that mean very different things. So that's also something to be aware of. And unless we start talking about what we actually mean, we might have big discussions about it. So this was one of the big things. So we created a bunch of to-dos, and one of them was to make a new team agreement. And also putting in how do we work with AI, and what kind of AI. But also they put in, we are going to talk. At least once a week we're going to have an hour where we have coffee and talk. One of the things about working remote is that it can be harder to build a team, and it can be harder to build psychological safety. But the techniques that you use are the same as when you are building psychological safety in a room, where everyone is in the same room. One of my friends did some research together with Amy Edmondson, who is the foremost researcher on psychological safety. There's a link to his articles as well. And it turns out it's basically the same things, but some of the things you have to do more actively. Because if you're in the same location, you go get coffee together. If you're not, you turn off or you close the computer or put on you remove your video and you go separately. So you have to make time for these things when you're remote, because it doesn't just happen. I at least see this also like, if I'm sitting next to someone, it's so easy to turn around. If I have to contact them on Slack, I think an extra time, because like, what if I disturb them? That means that you have to put in these more actively. And what they decided to do was to have a team meeting once a week. Then I talked to them about appreciations. And what I always do when people do this is that if anyone comes out about someone outside the team, someone has to take the task of telling them. And it's quite interesting how hard it is for people to accept appreciations. It's also hard for people to appreciate others. But at least in the Nordic countries, it can be super hard to accept appreciations. A standard answer would be, I'm just doing my job. But still, it's good to do, and it's good to practice. And then just talking more. They were just spending time producing, which is good. But it also meant that they were not talking together. And that was why all of these things happened. They were not talking enough. And sometimes we can feel that talking takes away the time from the real work, but typing is not development. Typing is part of development. Development is thinking together, standing at a whiteboard, discussing things, asking questions, trying out things, figuring out something is broken, trying out things that you're sure work and then it breaks. There's so much to development besides typing. But it's so easy to focus on that because that's when you can see that you work. So having these conversations and starting also to think more together and having silence is one of the things they started to do. So that's the end of the story for now. There's still a team. I think two people left the team. One because it was an external consultant and the contract ended. Another one was because someone else needed more help with design than they did. But there's still a team, and they still collaborate. And they still end up in discussions, but now they know what to do about it. They started talking about their team agreements in every daily. So every daily they will read one of their team agreements, just to remind them about what they agreed on. And I'm sure they will end up in conflict again, because they really care about what they do. One of the interesting parts about working with public television is that they usually don't pay very well. But that also means that most people who are there because they care very much about that public television exists and that they contribute to this. And when people care a lot about their work and they're different, it crashes. But we need that difference to get the good ideas, because if we all think the same, I mean, we would all be looking at black and white TV on broadcast. Somebody came up with colors. Somebody came up with, let's watch it online. Like everything we have in here, someone came up with. And sometimes those things we come up with is because of a crash. Someone says, yeah, we've always done it this way, and then someone comes in and does something else because nobody told them that this is the way you do it. So having people that are different helps do that, helps us get better products, helps us ask those questions. It's one of the reasons I love having juniors come in, because they ask that question we forgot. It's also super annoying because you think you have everything under control, but you have to learn to live with that. Because it activates things, but you also need to be aware that it does take time. And it takes an effort and good intentions. And then when you get into a fight or whatever you do, a small conflict, because you will, we are all humans. There's a reason there's backspace on our computers. We make mistakes all the time. Then fixing it is the important part. It's not about avoiding conflicts. Swedish people are very good at avoiding conflicts. They like harmony. They're also very good at being passive-aggressive. My first year in Sweden, we had a Slack group for non-Swedes, and we joked that one of the tests that you had to do is to become a Swede was to become passive-aggressive. Because if you don't talk about things, it comes out anyway. And of course, that's stereotyping, and it's not all Swedes and stuff like that. But there is something to Swedish people wanting more harmony. Some say that it goes back to ages ago, like thousands of years ago. Because in Denmark, you could go out with a boat on your own. In Sweden, you had to move a mountain to get to the other side almost. You could only do this if you collaborated. It's more important with harmony in those cases. But there can often be misunderstood harmony, and that's where the conflicts happen, because they tend to build. So we need to talk about these things. So the tools that I use are actually fairly simple. Doesn't mean they're easy. I usually say that my two main tools is caring about people and listening. Proper listening, sitting down and listening to people. And being quiet. I call it the power of silence. It's amazing what people will talk about when you're quiet. And you don't have to be quiet for very long, because some people find it very uncomfortable if it's quiet. But some people also just need time to kind of settle down and start talking about deep stuff. Preparing people. So not just saying, hey, there is a meeting on Friday, let's talk, but actually talking to each person and preparing them. It's the first time I've done it to this extent. But it's also the first time I went into a conflict that exploded this big. So I was like, this is something that needs extra attention. So I prepared everyone. But I actually see that it's a super good thing to prepare people. It's about trying to create a safe space, a place where people can talk about anything almost. You might have rules about what you cannot talk about, that's also okay. But creating a space where they can be uncomfortable talking about things. That means they need to know each other a little bit, they need to feel that this is okay. What I often do is I share something myself. I have learned from like 20 years now, I practiced being uncomfortable because people share stuff with me. Sometimes people share very, very horrible stuff with me, and I know how to be in it. But it took me a long time. And sometimes I share some of these things, and I share my vulnerability or my fears or whatever it is, to help them create that space. It's also very much about setting a frame. These are the rules. This is where we want to go. And interesting enough, that's also what I see in good engineering departments. You set a frame, you set a direction. And then people within it get to use their own brains. Because if we don't do that, we just have the manager's brain. We want everyone's brains. But you do want to set that frame, because our brain likes to have a frame to think within. It helps us become more creative. Like one of the reasons we have all those tiny Lego calendars is because of constraints. Because Lego really, really struggled 15 years ago. They had to sell off half of Legoland, which they just bought back. So they got a lot of constraints, and one of them was to use fewer bricks. So the designers had what is the smallest thing we can build? And that's when they started going like, okay, we have 3 bricks, we have the Millennium Falcon. Those things did not exist before they went into crisis. They had to use fewer colors, they had to use fewer shapes. Because they kind of went out of we need this special brick and this special brick. So if you look at the Harry Potter Lego from then, they would have like a brick that was this tall. Now they will have like 5 bricks on top of each other so you can use them for other stuff. So putting on constraints can also help creativity. And in this case, it can help people find a place where they can open up. And then being slow. I think one of the reasons we have a lot of conflicts in our workplace is we have to run and do and do and do and do. We very rarely slow down enough to be with each other and to think and to just feel each other's presence. And it can feel a little bit like hippie-ish. I'm very much not that. Well, maybe I'm a little bit. But learning about each other as humans also makes us work better as developers and whatever else we work with. This is the prime directive from the first book on retrospectives, project retrospectives, which was about 3-day retrospectives after you had a project for a year or 2. It came out way before we were working Agile, well, way before it was named Agile. Regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best they could. Given what they knew at the time, the skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. If you read this often enough, you start believing it. It took me a long time, because I'm like, there are stupid people. But people do things. Sometimes, like, if you have like, my cousin just had a baby. He looks like someone beat him up because the baby's not sleeping. His resources, his brain is not working optimally. We have all of these things. We can have that at home. We can be in some other situation. We can have, we can be sick. Maybe we're under pressure for something because we have something else we need to deliver. There's a lot of things that will affect the job that we do. Maybe we just don't have the knowledge about it. So this one I use very often. I used to sometimes put them into toilets on the door so that people would read them. Now they mostly read their phones, I think. But I still do this sometimes because it's good to think about that people are actually doing their best. It might not be good enough for that situation, but they are doing the best that they can. It's also good to think about this for yourself, that you're doing the best you can at that moment. Because we are a lot tougher on ourselves than we are on other people. What are the best techniques to use? It depends. I'm a certified it depends practitioner. I'm actually also one of the people who certify it depends practitioners. There is so much that depends on the people, which is also why you need to prepare these things. You need to prepare people, you need to prepare yourself, because we are so different as humans. You can't just take it from one place and go to another. Okay, there is an interesting sign there. You cannot see the sign. There's a lot of listening in this. It's really good to learn about communication in your team as well, both if you are someone working and helping teams, but also in teams. And then talking about it before it becomes necessary. Very often, we don't talk about these things until it explodes. Not just at work, also at home, or with our friends. Start talking about these things. What do we need? How are we going to do this? Sometimes I help people make a personal manual. Like, what really pisses me off? What do I need to concentrate? Do I like when I was a manager, I would ask people, how do you like feedback? And people would be like, I don't know. Do you like it in public? Do you want me to give you feedback when there are other people, or would you like me to wait? Some people like it in writing, So talking about these things in teams and with people you work with, whether you're the manager or the coach or whatever, is a good idea. It's also hard because it's about humans, but it's super necessary. So, wrapping up, listen to people. I might have said this once before. Take time. Take the time to actually settle and go into this. It's so easy to go like, yeah, but we have the weekly retrospective, but that's an hour and that's fine. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not enough. Setting the frame and giving people the tools, in this case, to communicate, to know about what needs and feelings are. Give them something they can work with. Don't just expect that because it's a human thing. I mean, sometimes we even do this with tech. We're going like, you're a developer. Of course you know all these things. Not necessarily. Maybe I didn't work with this for 20 years. I might have, I learned stuff when I studied computer science that I have not touched since. I don't know anything about that anymore. If you need something, you should give people the tools. Feelings and needs do belong at work. That's very important. And you're not another person when you're at work. You might show a different side of yourself, but they don't just disappear because you go to work. It takes an effort to do these things. It takes an effort to build safety. It takes an effort to talk about these things, but it is worth it. And then one of my messages is to be kind. Be kind to other people. Be kind to yourself. I deliberately do not say nice. Nice means I will tell you everything is fine. Kind means I will also give you negative feedback if needed, but I will do it in a good way. And if you do these things, your collaboration will hopefully be better, or you might find out that you cannot collaborate with these people. But that's also a good learning instead of staying in it. That's all I had for today. I am very happy to talk about these things. When Twitter was nice, I tweeted a lot. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm not as active there. But I do always like a cup of coffee, whether that's virtual or not, and I like to talk about these things. There are slides here with more information about communication, about needs, about feelings, if you want to look it up. And I will post them somewhere. I actually don't know if the conference, they must post them, and if not, I'm going to post them on the one that's not speaker deck, the one that's not slides here. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was useful at least a little bit.